All right, good afternoon. First of all, first and foremost, let's give a round of applause to Kim and the entire FutureCon team for putting together such a great conference today. Outstanding. Been to several of these. This has been great. Had some great conversations with all of you. So without further ado, my name is Chad Maskill, Enterprise Sales Manager and Cyber Hero with ThreatLocker. It's my pleasure to moderate today's panel in behalf of FutureCon. Thank you for your attendance, and it was a pleasure meeting all of you guys out there. I think I've met all of you today. It's pretty easy in this short space. So for today's panel, we're going to be maybe a little bit different. We're going to encourage audience participation. So I feel that that's actually a great way to learn and engage in some topics that's really mattering to all of us. So with that being said, I'll present a question to the panel. And after their response, I'll open it to the floor for you to ask questions of the panel members. If you would like to directly address one of the panel members, please address them directly. We have Stephany, Tom, Ronnie, and Brett. Or if it's just for the general panel, just say, this is just a question for the general panel. We have a list of questions. We may not get through all of them today. What's most important is that we have that lively conversation and you guys learn. This is an educational process. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic around. Oh, wait, you guys have a mic over there. So I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves and who they are, where they work, and something interesting about themselves.
Thank
Stephany?
you very much. So hello, everyone. My name is Stephany Setrajcic. I am the Vice President of IT Audit at MetaBank. It's a new role for me. I've been there for 2 months. Prior to going back into IT audit, I was working for Isc, which is now Cytel, and I was their head of global security assurance. So hopefully I'll be able to provide some different perspectives for you as someone that's worked in audit and security. Something interesting about myself, I was in People magazine for my wedding dress.
Hi, I'm Tom Hughes. I'm the IT Bureau Chief at Southwest Florida Water Management District. I've been there for a while now, not terribly long, but in my role for about 5 years. And something interesting about myself is that I was not in People magazine for any reason at all.
I don't know if I can top that. Ronnie Munn, I'm the Deputy CISO for Galway Holdings. I've been there for about 4 months, and I just was recruited from my previous life of incident response and digital forensics, which I did for about 2 decades. I was the Grim Reaper that came along when the bad things happened to you, and you were on the other side of a threat actor's tactics. So I've got a very interesting perspective to bring from kind of what happens if you don't listen to these guys, and what I've seen from my travels. Something interesting about myself is I'm probably one of the biggest hillbillies you'll ever meet. Hunting, fishing, four-wheeling, you name it. That's kind of me in a nutshell.
I'm Brett Conlon. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer over at American Century. I have been there for just over 3 months now. Prior to that, I was at Edelman Financial, and prior to that, I spent about 15, 20 years working both missile defense and FBI. So something interesting about myself, I have laid down the law at my house and said that we'll have 1 dog, and that's it. And so now we now have 3 dogs and 3 bunnies and a hamster. So if there's any question over the authority that I wield, I want to let you know now. And there's also, just so everyone's aware, there's some seats in the front if you would like to come up here. I saw a few people looking. Yeah, there they are. Yes. Okay.
Excellent, excellent. Wow, I can't even top that, so I won't. So we're going to get started with the questions. They're not going to be quite as lighthearted, I guess. But we're going to start with the questions. I'm going to open the question. The panel is going to answer the question, and then we're going to open the floor to questions based on their responses or just general questions to the panel in general. So without further ado, at the top of everyone's mind is nation-state attacks, currently Russia, North Korea, China. How have you responded, and what kind of status are you communicating back to the teams and boards? We're going to start this question with Stephany.
Thank you. So working for a bank, I think the first question that we were getting is we have to support sanctions against Russia. And so how are we ensuring that the money and the transactions that we're processing are staying compliant? And then as a person that's in audit, we're being asked, how are you getting comfortable with our cybersecurity program as a bank? What kind of audits are you doing? Do you feel comfortable with the controls that are in place? I'm sure the CISO has different conversations with the board and the audit committee around how they're getting comfort over preventative controls, thinking ahead, what are different attack vectors. But I would say from my perspective, it's really been on compliance and making sure that the risks are being considered and that the controls are strong.
For us, being a government organization, if you've been following any of the articles, and Brad Smith wrote in his blog most recently from a study that Microsoft did, that nearly 60% of organizations targeted are government and critical infrastructure. And so we kind of fit into both of those categories. They've stepped up, Russia has stepped up attacks on countries that are basically alliance countries supporting the Ukraine. And so United States is one of those, right? And so obviously U.S. government organizations are a target. And so it hasn't really changed what we've been doing. It just means that we're much more vigilant and we're watching for things that may be out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I would say our conversations are past prevention, right? When you're talking the geopolitical landscape on something like this, Tom and team of critical infrastructure are targeted, but more in you know, kind of the private sector. It's the fog of war, right? You're not going to go and you're not going to, you know, immediately try to start shopping an RFP for, you know, an MDR provider. You're stuck with pretty much the controls that you have in place at this point in time. So you have to focus on what you can control. So you ask yourself from a response point of view, what can I control? I can control, you know, my MFA maturity to make sure that people are using multi-factor. I can control my patching and reduce my vulnerabilities. I can control what critical systems I've identified and the backups that are associated with that. You don't want to end up with Schrodinger's backup where you don't know if it's alive or dead until you actually go to restore it. You want to start testing those things. So what we started doing was having conversations around tabletop exercises, right? We're going to simulate these things. We're going to flush out the gaps that we need to identify. We're going to tweak our processes. We're going to put in the efficacy checks on things like the backups and make sure that we can restore continuity to critical services if we need to, and have those conversations with legal, insurance, local and federal law enforcement, understand things like, hey, if we did get caught up in any type of incident or a breach of some kind, ransomware as an example, what should we be considering in terms of, you know, what we're allowed to do from a regulatory perspective, contractual with our clients, as well as things like Ofac sanctions and things at the federal level. So a lot of good conversations and maturity was built out of those, and it came from having these conversations with the board.
Yeah, I think I would echo what everyone else says, right? Our strategy does not really change all that much given the what's going on with Ukraine and Russia and really anywhere else. We base our approach off of the risks that are posed to the company, and then we look at the risks and what they mean, and then how we're going to approach it and put the controls in place to minimize or eliminate the risk. So hopefully for most of you all, the Ukraine-Russia war didn't change a whole lot. I think a lot of the times if you're seeing your strategy completely upend, you need to take a closer look at as to why you're having to change it every single time there's a new threat in the news.
Excellent. I would like to open up to the floor now for general questions. I'm going to walk on back here. And Joey.
How you doing? Joey Hernandez from SecureWorks. Thank you for attending today. So quick question from a leadership perspective. We see that everybody today talked a little bit about people, processes, and technologies. When we have the challenge of people and organizations identifying what their critical information is, their critical systems are, and the critical personas are, what do you think, based on your roles that you're currently in, is going to be the biggest area of spending in 2022 when it comes to people, processes, and technologies to be able to help your organization identify the critical information, critical systems, and critical personas?
I mean, I would think that that's organizational specific. So depending on the maturity of the organization, then that's going to determine what they're spending their money on. So size and maturity, but for us, it's probably going to be the third party and fourth party risk.
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely personnel for us. This is a year of turnover with with the pandemic and the whole work from home movement, and having people looking for opportunities to continue to stay that way where they don't have to go back into the office. That's definitely something that's going to change, and with that comes insider threat. Right, so from a process perspective, understanding how we're going to be able to take care of data loss prevention, not necessarily malicious or nefarious, but all those areas that are surrounding the policies around personnel and work from home.
So Ronnie brings up a good point. Work from home, and you guys know this, it's changed how we do things, right? Where we once had everybody inside the walls, inside the firewall. Maybe you had 10% of your people working remotely, and they did it sporadically. They went to a conference like today, and they needed to use their laptop, and so you sent them with a tool to be able to facilitate that. Well, now, you may have 50, 70, 80% of your staff working off-site every day, and so it's changed things a lot. So we've invested, a lot of our efforts have been invested in, and it's a little bit of a buzzword again, but expending past the past the perimeter, past the perimeter. I'm an old guy, so I forget words. Past the perimeter, and controlling as much as you can control at that home PC or that staff person that's working out of Starbucks today because their internet went down and they needed to get on from someplace. And then we have people coming in and out, obviously, and so then they're back in the office, and it changes the dynamic again. And so staff are changing back and forth in that way. And so going back to the controls, if you've got good layered controls in place, you're thinking about all of those risks and you're mitigating those risks using appropriate controls, then you're going to be in a good spot. And so it doesn't really matter whether or not those staff are working on-site or off-site, does it? Because we've been thinking about our controls. We know that we've got appropriate controls in place for staff that are working inside the office. Malware and phishing attempts are an issue regardless of where they're at. So we have to continue our awareness training. We have to have all of those tools in place. We have to have our data loss prevention in place. We have to have good backups in place, and the list goes on and on and on.
I think where I'm at currently, I'm seeing investments in automation of user access reviews. So going past the point of just identifying who doesn't need the access anymore, but the tool actually taking that access away once that's been identified, so you eliminate the service desk and the manual component of it. MFA has been a really big push now that we're at home, and putting DLP solutions on our cell phones, on our laptops for work. So anything that will help mitigate the people risk, I'm seeing has been a big push this year.
How you guys doing? I was kind of more back to the question that Chad asked. You kind of stated, regardless of the geopolitical situation, the strategy shouldn't change. This is just open to the panel. In your experience, would you view that an attack launched by a state sponsor group would be viewed differently by law enforcement than if it was just a regular criminal organization, or do you think it's treated the same way as regards on holding the victim responsible?
We'll let the FBI go first.
So first, let's just start with the fact that the attribution, right? So most companies, unless you're a significantly large company, are not going to be able to determine attribution. What's going on in the nation state and the geopolitical wars right now, they're about to release it as software as a service. So you're not going to even know if it's coming from an actual state sponsor or if it's actually an individual who bought a state-sponsored malware, state-sponsored ransomware, and then deployed it. Now, will it determine how the law enforcement gets involved? So that's more around the incident response piece, and that's more around what are the protocols that you have in place to engage law enforcement. I will tell you, I mean, it's a little bit, I have a cheat sheet, so it's a little bit easier for me to get law enforcement involved, but and to foster those relationships. But what I have heard is, depending on the size of the company, depends on how quick you get law enforcement to react. I think you have to take an active role in trying to consistently reach out to law enforcement and bring them to the table. The more that they can do proactively before an incident occurs, the more you're going to see a better response around it. And I think over the past couple of years, they've shifted their approach. So there used to be a hard and fast, don't pay ransomware, don't do this, don't do that. If there's a bad actor on your network, we want to know about it. We want to monitor it. Don't change that. That's all changed now. So those kind of things aren't there. I think the government, and specifically the FBI, realizes that they have to change their approach. So there is much more of a partnership, and they understand that there is a business element to where it makes more sense for me to stop the bad actor and just eliminate the threat than continue to collect information so that the FBI can make an assessment as to where the attribution occurs. So that has changed over the past couple of years, and the director who's in charge of the cyber branch now is pushing for that more and more. Does that answer? Yeah, it does. Okay.
Yeah, and I will kind of echo that. I work very closely with the FBI. I went to their Citizens Academy. I actually know the director who he's talking about very personally. The reality of it is you should get to know your local field office. They have a community outreach branch that you can call, and I mentioned tabletop exercises earlier. You can actually call and schedule to have an actual FBI specialist sit in on the panel, and they can provide the FBI's point of view at this point in time, and they can educate your business appropriately so you can find the right blend. The reality of it is they're fighting a more of a macro fight to find these guys and indict them. You guys are dealing with it at that micro level, right? And all of that micro information that you can feed up to them only helps them. And they're more than happy to come in. They're not coming in suits and ties. They'll come in jeans and a T-shirt, be incognito, whatever you need them to do when you go through this. And I will say that it also depends on the flavor of the attack, right? From a monetary perspective, they do have kind of thresholds, and depending on what kind of attack, different tactic they used against you. If we're talking ransomware, that's one conversation. And the field offices specialize in different variants, right? So you might get directed to a different field office in order to be able to work with that particular variant. But in terms of like business email compromise or email account compromise, you're going to be talking to different teams, right? And you're going to be having different conversations about how do we stop wire transfers, as an example. And if you do that quick enough working with them, they have a high success rate within 72 hours of actually pulling that money back if you communicate to them and reach out to them quickly enough. IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, online, you guys can file there as well if you want to do it online. But my advice would be get to know your local field office, get to know an agent in the area, and then start working with their community outreach specialists to be able to get some of this. And they also provide a few other value adds. I mean, they'll come do active shooter training for your organization if you guys want to take advantage of those types of things. So there's a lot of services that they can provide to you if you build a relationship with them. They're not coming in, taking your servers, and kind of kicking out the IP and all those kind of things. So get to know them. They're a valuable asset. From my perspective, I would steer any of my clients that direction.
So we're a little bit different. We're regulated, but in a different way. And so we definitely have protocols in place for when law enforcement is required, and our CCERT plan is very robust. And so for us, it's just following the processes and making sure that we've got chain of custody in place. We can validate whatever we need to validate to hand that off to law enforcement. And again, going back to things like including, back in our CCERT plan, our legal team, our internal counsel, and determining whether or not they will determine whether or not this is something that will engage law enforcement rather than IT.
And I would agree with everything that's been said. The strategy is to protect, and then the response, who to involve, really would be made, that decision would be made by legal management. We're regulated by the OCC, and so we would need to involve them as well. But overall, I think the key is to make sure that you have a very strong security posture and a plan for what to do if something does happen.
We have a virtual question from Tom E. His question is, are VPNs with multi-factor authentication a secure enough method for home workers, or is there a better option?
Start on this side again.
No. So again, open-ended question, but most people probably don't configure their VPN correctly. So the VPN is probably open to all. Once you get in, you have access to everything. If that's the case, then is it secure? Most likely not. The time and effort it takes to lock down a VPN correctly so that you're only allowing access in certain areas, I have not typically seen a company do that. So, I think that multi-factor can absolutely be bypassed. I think we've learned that by now. VPN is usually just you get into it and then you have full open and access. So depending on how your VPN is configured, I would say that you have to be very cautious of that. And I think that just remember, you have an entire industry that is designed around looking at what security is doing and figuring out ways to bypass it. So anytime you look at, is this technology with this secure, they most likely are testing, how do I get into a VPN around MFA? And they figured it out. So that in and of itself is not secure.
Yeah, and I would echo everything you just said and add just one thing to it. The bad guys only have to be right once. You got to be right 100% of the time. So from a configuration perspective, you also have the human error component of this. If you do choose to do that, then there should be some level of efficacy checks to make sure that it is locked down. ACLs, extended ACLs, those types of things to limit the traffic into DMZs or whatever needs to be done there. With modern technology like SASE solutions and those types of things, cloud-based services, to me, the VPN piece is kind of a technology of the past.
Good.
That's great.
Gonna borrow this microphone here. Okay, so what I would like to do is move on to the second question now. This is one that I think is going to be a little bit of a hot topic here, and it may be a little bit opinionated, but I really want to get to this one. I think this is going to really give us some lively discussion. So, do boards and non-security business leaders really care about cybersecurity, or are we just telling ourselves that? Do they need to understand it? And I'm going to start off with, let's say, Tom on this one.
Hey. I can talk loud, but yeah, your board definitely needs to have some understanding. What that level is really is dependent upon the audience. So obviously in most boards, you've got technical people and you've got non-technical people. So you do have to be able to speak to your board, know your audience, be able to speak to them in the way that they can understand what's happening. And so how often should you do that? I'm sorry, that's another question, isn't it? So, but I'll blend them if that's okay. And so I don't want to jump ahead. So anyway, how often should you do that? As often as is needed. They need to know, they need to have some comfort level with where you're at, understanding what you're doing, again, that you've got sufficient controls in place, and that there are no questions left unanswered as far as they're concerned. Talking about frameworks, you can get really geeky, right? And so your board doesn't want to get to that level. They want to understand that you know what you're doing, the frameworks explaining the NIST framework, the cybersecurity framework, explaining the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, things like that are beneficial, but again, keeping it at a high level so that they understand, again, that you're in the organization is in a place where they're confident that you're protecting resources appropriately.
So do board members really care about cybersecurity? I think that they think or they know that they're supposed to. I don't think they know exactly how to take it out of the realm of it being an IT problem and turn it into a business problem. What I can tell you is that when you do have an incident or a breach, they care very quickly. I've seen projects get done in days, weeks that were, 9 months in the works already due to an incident. I've seen checkbooks fly open, and all of those things that were wish list items are now pushed to the front of the line, and they're gonna be tackled within months. Incidents and breaches and potentially going out of business or losing your job is extremely motivating, I think. So from should they care or do they know that they care? I don't think they do. I think they know they're supposed to, and I think any objective person would see it going on in the news every single day. But I don't think they know how to apply it just yet is really what I think the problem is.
Yeah, so regulation is going to require them to care. A lot of them already do care. I think that they are curious as to where to start. So in my experience, you're seeing probably 3 types of boards. The ones that don't know they have to care quite yet, and so you should be educating them on that. Then there's the ones who are either regulatory bound or they are about to be, and they know they have to care, but they're still confused as to what they need to be worried about. And so again, bring them along the journey. Security should not be about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and it should not be anything but transparent. So bring them along and explain to them what they should be asking if they don't know. Ask them to lean in, ask them to ask the right questions, and help direct them to the right questions to be asking. And then you have the third where they've already brought cyber experts on the board, and that is just showing that board is ahead of the game. But I think that in the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot more cyber experts joining boards, and you should welcome it as a CISO. So there you go.
So I think that there's a lot of literature out there that different firms put together. They'll do risk reports and they'll survey boards, CEOs, chief audit executives, CIOs, and say, what's the top of mind risk for you? And cybersecurity is always at the top of that list. Now that's different than do they care versus are they concerned? So I think yes, boards are concerned about cybersecurity. I agree with what everyone else has said, that education is needed. Since I've been in my position, I've been asked, where is the cybersecurity audit on the plan? And we've had to educate and say, well, there's a lot of different things that make up cybersecurity. We don't have one audit that covers all of that. We've also been asked, well, where's the ransomware audit on this plan? We're like, well, we wouldn't do an audit of ransomware. So they don't understand fully what does cybersecurity mean and what you have to do to ensure a robust program. So as far as you can go around framing this in language they understand, what's the business objective, what's the risk, what is the company trying to achieve, and explaining how you're protecting and enabling that priority will go a long way.
Sorry about that. Okay, any follow-ups, questions from the floor? Because that could move us right into the next question, because I think that's a very nice follow-up. I'm going to go with, do cybersecurity leaders generally understand how to talk to the board and business leaders about what they care about? Conveying that message. We just talked about, do they care? But are we communicating that? So I think we'll start the conversation with Ronnie.
Yeah, absolutely not. In most cases, they get in the weeds, metrics and data analytics, and Tom referenced, getting deep into frameworks and all those pieces. That's not what they need to hear. They're looking for risk-based discussion, right? And they're looking for data-driven decisions. And, they want to know that you're on track and you're tracking towards your goals. But they want to put it in terms of business risk, right? They want to be looking at it specifically towards brand and reputation, right? And from my experience, the conversation with security leadership inside a board, it needs to become a good relationship. And, Brett mentioned that we're going to have, CISOs or security personnel sitting on the board. If you don't, you need to become an extension of that board so you can help influence those decisions as opposed to just being adjacent to them. I think that most of our security leaders today, they bring too much information to the meeting. They need to bring the crux of it, the meat and the potatoes, and they need to have a conversation and know how to put it in terms of business risk in order to get through to that board.
Yeah, I guess I would ask the audience on this one is like, how many people here report to a board? How many people here actually actively talk to their board on a regular basis? So typically, I mean, that's actually pretty good. I think everybody who said they reported to the board are actually talking to the board. But typically, they're not developing those relationships. They show up in a quarter, they present their metrics, and they walk away. We would never do that anywhere else. You would never show up to your boss and say, here you go, and then walk away. You would develop a relationship. The board is no different. They're an extension of your boss. So you should be developing relationships with them. And I would echo what Ronnie said. Like, unfortunately, security has just not gotten there right now. They're not presenting correctly to the board. They are coming with a lot of technical information. They're talking about NIST, but they don't know how to translate that, and they've lost the business. They will walk away from a board meeting saying that what dumb questions were asked, or they didn't understand what I was saying, or can you believe they asked me what my greatest risk was after I showed 6 pages of metrics, but then they're not talking the language of the business. And so it's an educational piece, and then it's also a piece of understanding what the business cares about. They do not care about that you have 6,000 high vulnerabilities. That means absolutely nothing to them. What they do care about is their recent product launch is at risk because of XYZ. All right, then that makes sense. If you're in the financial industry, they're looking at what? Close to a 20% dip right now. So you coming in and saying, well, I just need more money to do more things, doesn't really make much sense. But explaining that this is an actual used as an opportunity by bad actors because you're seeing layoffs, you're seeing people stall on hiring, not increasing in certain areas. Like, that's exactly what's wanted. So what are the areas that you're going to create efficiencies around to help support the business and yet better improve the risk posture? So I just don't think it's there yet. Hopefully it will get there.
Yeah, so kind of a repeat of what we just talked about a minute ago, and then echoing some of the rest of the panel. It's really just explaining it in terms that they understand and talking through the issues, aligning it to the business needs, as opposed to, sharing a whole lot of metrics. Like he said, those matter, but they matter more to us than they matter to those on the outside looking in. They really need to understand what potential impact, if the business stops, if the daily operation stops, or that goal is going to be impacted, that makes a difference, right? And so it has to be, you have to share it in language that they understand, in terms that they understand, aligning it to the business goals, aligning it to the business needs. And our tagline is our goal is to build a sustainable program that balances the needs for protection against the needs of the business. And so that's really what the IT cybersecurity plan is really focused on, balancing the need for protection against the needs of the business.
I think regardless of what kind of a job you have, whether you work in IT or finance or HR, when you're going to be presenting information to somebody, if it's PowerPoint and you have a slide, ask yourself, what do I want the person that's seeing this to take away from this slide? And then if I was them, what questions would I have about that information? And I think that's a really good rule of thumb to apply to a board presentation. Are you speaking in terms they understand? If they're going to take away one thing from that slide, can they get it from what you've shown them? If you've put up a bunch of beautiful charts and graphs, does it stand out what you're trying to say? And then try to really anticipate, what will they ask me, and be prepared to answer those questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the audience on this one? Okay, so let's do one follow-up to that. So let's put it back on ourselves. Do cybersecurity leaders need to develop more business skills to be effective in participating in that communication? So let's start all the way down at the end with Brett.
Yeah, that's simple. Yes. Yep, simple.
Okay. I'll go a little deeper. I agree, yes. There's a fundamental change that's being discussed around shared accountability for security. And what this concept, and this is brought by Gartner, and they're predicting that's going to happen within the next 2 to 5 years. They're predicting that businesses and organizations are going to shift to take the security decision, all security decision making out of security's hands and put it into business owner or department owner, put it in their hands to make that security call, right? So the idea and the way this concept goes, and I'm not by at all means saying I agree with it at this point, I'm just saying there's a concept coming to where if I'm in HR or payroll and I'm shopping a new software, I'm not going to security for vendor management. I've been trained on what to look for, and I know how to do that vendor management and vet that software out appropriately on my own. And then security is the trust and verify guy, right? They're going to trust that you're doing it right. They're going to come in behind. They're not going to stall your process and become the time gate. In that model, that would argue that security needs to know every aspect of the business, and they need to know each and every one of those business units and not just their own or the strategic direction of the business alone. They're going to need to know the strategic direction of all those business units and why it's important to the business in that particular case. We'll see if that's a strategy that gets adopted or not, but according to Gartner, it is coming.
So that's good, Ronnie. So that's basically it in a nutshell, isn't it? You have to understand the business unit. You have to understand what's important to them. And the same thing's true about, going back to the board communication, what's important to them, what matters. And so communicating back to our business units, aligning the business needs, that's what it's all about. I know we use those phrases, aligning to the business needs, but it's really talking to them. It's a conversation, right? Yeah, it starts with that relationship and builds on that and making sure that they know, we know what they need, and they know what we can do. And so it's understanding those the challenges that they're facing. It's understanding what it is that they need to get done. What are their goals this year? How many times does a business unit create a goal that impacts IT and you don't know about it until it's 2 months away from being due, right? And so those communications those conversations have to happen early. You have to understand what your business units are engaged in and what it is that they need from you, and that's just absolutely a necessity. And communicating, one of the challenges that we oftentimes face is that we want to talk about the technology. It's much less about the technology, and it needs to be much more about what they need from us.
So I agree. I have reported into CISOs in the past that were technically brilliant and also understood the business very well, but I feel that it would have been beneficial for them to also have project management skills and also leadership skills. When those are lacking, it's very easy to come up with the vision and ideas for where the company needs to go, but just a snap of the fingers isn't going to make that happen. And if they can't rally the people that work for them around that vision and understand timelines and constraints and budgets on resources, those people will leave. And so I do feel it would be very beneficial to also have the business skills.
We have a virtual question from Tony. In a lot of smaller companies, the security guy wears a dual hat as an admin, and sometimes their security voice gets lost or minimized in favor of IT. What are your thoughts on this type of situation, and what do you recommend on how to elevate the security voice?
Thank you. It's definitely a challenge. Smaller organizations, how do you leverage your talent, right? You've got limited resources. You've got they definitely have when you say limited resources, that's everything. So it's limited people, it's limited time, and high demand. So it's in a lot of cases it's the same level of requirement that a larger, I shouldn't say large, but a larger organization has with far fewer resources to be able to facilitate it, right? So that's a challenge. Leveraging those resources is not an easy task. And so again, it kind of goes back to those doing the basics. If you're doing the basics, you know, there was an interview a long time ago, Michael Jordan, how did he win all those championships? It's doing the basics over and over and over again, dribbling, shooting, passing. And so you have to do the basics over and over and over again. You got to nail the basics. You got to do the important things, the things that matter the most, and you have to keep doing them. You have to keep doing them right. And then that just builds. And multiplying resources outside of your organization. And so there are a lot of vendors here, for example, and again, it depends on availability of finances, but there are a lot of organizations here that can help multiply your workforce and do a lot of those things that you can't do internally to be able to facilitate those things that you know you need to be able to do.
Anybody out there grow through M&A? Every time you have an acquisition, do they add headcount to your IT staff and security staff? Right, yeah. So typically, and we do a lot of that at Galway, probably between 10 and 20 a year. And very few times will you increase your operational overhead, but you're increasing your user population, right? So to the point of the virtual question, I think a lot of the security and IT ops guys deal with that same level of problem. What I can tell you is that buy versus build conversation and building trusted partners, true partners, not vendors, true partners that can help you get through that is probably your best bet because FTEs are hard to come by, but contracts are a different conversation, right? Different budgets. So.
Yeah, if the question is just how do you raise the voice of security if you're running a multi-hat role, I really would just come back to you have to know your audience, you got to know the business, and how do you explain the risk? Try to explain the risk to the company for around the security, and that's probably the best thing you can do at this point.
Okay, Matt Geary.
Hi, so you guys are all in some high-powered positions, but I can't be the only person that noticed all underneath 3 months, 4 out of 4. So I think it's top of mind of everybody about was that because of is the industry you're seeing talent recruitment? Is it salary based? Is it is that something, or was it some other guy was unfortunate and was fired? What are you seeing in as far as that? We all want to be paid more, right? So was it really that, or what was it?
3 out of 4. I've been in my role for 5 years, so they haven't fired me yet. So no. I'm thankful for that. So I'll let Ronnie go.
Yeah. For me, I was 13 years at my previous company, and Bruce, the guy that I'm filling in for, the CISO for Galway, he was the CIO at Isc Squared. And anybody see ISSP, CISO, those guys? Yeah, okay. So at Isc Squared, he had a role where he was, with the pinnacle standard of cybersecurity and education, and basically the how do I do this, how should you do this kind of model. I did a lot of support for that organization in my previous role, and he recruited me to come ride shotgun with him because he's the guy that tells you how to do it. And I'm the guy that's going to show you all the bad that's going to happen if you don't. And we form a pretty good pair in the boardroom in order to be able to really rationalize the risk the right way. So for me, it was a recruitment thing because talent is short and scarce, and he needed to go with somebody that he trusted in this role.
So for me, I was with Jabil for 15 years, and in 2000, when COVID hit, they did a reduction in force, and I was let go. So I went to Sykes, and it was great for me. Very similar culture. I really enjoyed what I was doing, but they were acquired last August by Sitel. And if you dig a little bit into the Okta breach, Cytel is the vendor that they named as the source of the vulnerability. So for me, working under the leadership of the new company, looking at all of the things that were happening in the environment, I felt that it was a good time to make a move. But I think, your question around, do people leave for compensation? Is it to work at home? When I decided to leave, it was both. That was important to me in my search. I've gotten used to not having a 2-hour commute. And I think now that you can work anywhere, compensation is important. And I'm finding right now we're trying to recruit, and even though we can hire from any of the 50 states, it's still difficult to find people that we can afford. The company I work for now is based out of South Dakota. They're not paying New York salaries or California salaries. So it is difficult, but I'd say for myself, it was definitely just reacting to life circumstance.
I haven't gone anywhere, so we do experience turnover, and so and kind of echoing what was already talked about. Probably the biggest thing for us is being a government organization, we can't pay the same level that most private can. And so how do we offset that? Some of that is benefits. We can't necessarily compete with every organization out there either, but there's also work-life balance. And so we try to make sure that our staff has a good quality of life. We still try to get done everything that we need to get done in a really timely manner. I should take out the qualifier try. We do get done everything that we need to get done in a timely manner, but we want to make sure that our staff aren't overwhelmed either. So quality of life is a high value for us culturally, and so we want to make sure that we communicate that, and that oftentimes ends up being an attraction for staff. Actually, we have a position right now that somebody who was at the organization left and went to work in private enterprise and now wants to come back after a couple of years working in private. It's like my life is upside down. And so you see the grass isn't always greener on the other side of the fence. And so they're interested in coming back and joining us again.
So the question was just, did we leave because of higher pay, or? For us to move over to the new position? Yeah, definitely not money. Typically money doesn't really come into play when you're looking at these types of things. I think money's nice, but ultimately, anyone who says they're moving strictly for money is that's probably not the underlying cause. But for me specifically, I'd been through numerous M&As. I've been at the same company for 8+ years, and the right opportunity came at the right time, and it was a good time for me to move on. But I think for anyone, ultimately, it's going to come down to, is it a good cultural fit? And I don't mean to use that as a buzzword. I sincerely, I will tell my entire team, you will always find more money. No matter where you go, you will find more money. So if you're here for more money, you'll find it. I will never be the highest paying job because you will always find more money. My job is to make sure that the team is as marketable as they can be, so that when they want to and they put their resume out in the street, they'll be snatched up real quick, but to build out a team dynamic and culture where they don't want to leave. And I've held true to that, and our retention has been phenomenal.
We have another virtual question from Patrick. Patrick asks, what is the single biggest change in cybersecurity or incident handling ideology that you think folks should be thinking about moving forward?
The biggest change in cyber, do you know?
I'll cover it from an incident handling. Yeah, I'll tackle it from incident handling. back in October of 2021, the United States National Treasury put in, with the Office of Foreign Asset Control, Ofac sanctions for people that pay ransomware from an incident handling perspective. So if you got in a situation where you were compromised by a threat actor and you had to make a decision around should I pay or should I not, and I'm trying to get my data back, I'm hemorrhaging X number of dollars an hour for, from a business disruption perspective, they were met with a decision to make. Hey, if you do this, it's actually considered, funding terrorism, and you could put yourself in a sanctions list from the U.S. federal government, right? And not a lot of people were aware of that at the time, and I think it's the communication's getting out there a little bit more. But when you are in the heat of a crisis like that, and you're presented with a difficult situation or a difficult decision to make in the middle of that, that could affect your business long-term down the road. It was quite an interesting disruption for a period of time on how, these victims would have to try to make those decisions and find counsel to help guide them when it was relatively new. So to me, from an incident handling and maybe even evidentiary procedures perspective, the Ofac sanctions were one of the biggest things that disrupted the IR world for probably the last 12 months. And there's a series of lists. I think there's 13 plus of SDN specifically designated name lists that you have to check in order to do this. The IR providers, the handlers, the incident response commanders have gotten really good at doing that now, so it's not quite as big of a problem as it was. But there was a time a couple months ago where that was a relatively big issue for businesses to consider.
So in the past 2 years, the places that I have worked, I've been able to sit and watch as the company dealt with 3 breaches, 3 incidents. And what I noticed was that, the first time it happened, there was a lot of confusion around how do we even get on a call with each other? Is somebody listening to this call? Is our email secure? Can we exchange messages? All of the forensics that we're collecting, where do we store this information? Are our servers compromised? So I think the basics have to be there. Do you have a playbook? Do you have a call tree? Do you know who you have to involve and when? And then how do you get back to normal? How do you truly know that the person that's infiltrated your network is gone and isn't just laying in wait for you to change everybody's password so they could just get all the new ones again? So I think regardless of how much things change or evolve, you have to have the basics in place.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Do we have one more question in the audience? Okay, we're going to head back out here. Walking back here. And Mr. Linton Harris.
Thanks, sir. Hey, great presentation. Thank you for your time. XDR, EDR, all that fun DR buzzword stuff is a hard sell to executives. I feel like lower end security people and help desk and stuff, they understand the importance of that. But executives, it's very hard to be like, hey, we need this. You kind of have to sell it to them. What would you would say to someone who's trying to sell, EDR, XDR, MDR to a CISO, executive board, who's pushing back because they don't see the value in it? They're like, oh, why can't you do it when, you have these tools who can help you out and speed it up and kind of bring the cream to the top? Like, what would you say? And thank you for your time.
So I would say it kind of goes back to what we were alluding to earlier. You have to frame everything in terms of risk or as a business problem that you're trying to solve. And as long as get there first. And if you can get them to understand what you're trying to pitch, then you can start to get into, have you thought about how you're going to pay for that? And what's the return on investment? Because then they want to see some numbers and understand some facts and figures.
Yeah, just kind of repeating. It's stating business value, making sure that they understand what the implications are of not doing and what benefit this provides to the organization. When you think about an internal security operations center, manning an internal security operations center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Most organizations, I'm not saying every organization, but most organizations can't do that, and you're shaking your head, so I'm assuming that's absolutely true, right? So having tools in place and even a third-party organization that's managing your SOC for you goes a long way. You can multiply, think about it. If you had to hire 8 staff to be able to facilitate a 24/7 operation, still only one deep in an 8-person operation, how much would that cost you as compared to the software that you're looking at purchasing? And so stating it in a bit, creating a real business case, stating it in terms that they understand, aligning it to, again, the value, stating the value of the proposition, it makes sense.
So I agree with all the value prop and the business decision pieces. Traditional antivirus that is signature or heuristic, that stuff, it had its 33rd birthday this year. I think it's time to have a conversation about we gotta adjust with the times, right? I think Brett mentioned earlier that for every security control you put in place, the threat actors are trying to find ways to get around it. Pretty sure they've got that one licked, right? So they know how to beat your traditional AV systems. The next gen piece, the XDR and the EDR are the way to go because they are more behavioral based, and they're going to be able to detect things like lateral movement in the event that some of the more signature based or polymorphic stuff actually gets through the front lines of the tool. So from that, you factor in all of its open source intelligence checks to where it can tie into your virus totals and all those other places looking for the different hash values that are out there. There's a technical value prop on this one, but 33 years old, it's time to move on, right?
I almost think you answered your own question with the question. So XDR, MDR, EDR, if you're coming to me with that, I would ask you to walk around this room, tell me how many MDR, EDR, XDR platforms we've got. No, right? Times that by 100, and I will get that many emails in a day or phone calls to let me know that they can solve a business problem that I never talked to them about. So if you're coming with the same approach that all the vendors are coming with, then that's probably not going to work. And I would expect more from my team of they should be coming to me not with a technology, definitely not with a buzzword, but more around an area that they're struggling, why they're struggling, and why they feel it's a risk to them. I don't need them to even come up with the ROI and all, like that's my job. But I do need to understand without any buzzwords what's going on, why do you need it, and why you feel it's important. The other piece should be think about what you're asking for. And this happens a lot at the executive level too, of if every other month you're coming in asking me for a new technology, you've now lost your voice. Because I don't understand, like if I solved it one time and now you're telling me there's another time, then we're just coming back more and more with problem after problem after problem. And what do you think the board's going to say to me if I just keep coming up saying, but now I need this, but now they're going to stop and say, I've given you all this money, I'm not quite understanding what we're looking to solve here. So I appreciate what everyone has to do, but sometimes I think it's lost on put yourself in the perspective of the other person. They're getting slammed with this all day. If you're coming to me with a buzzword, and if it sounds like a sales pitch, it just means that you found a nice shiny object that you really, really liked. If you don't even mention XDR, EDR, MDR, and you're really talking about, here's the problem that we're having, we've brought up this before, let's walk through the got it, understood, and let's talk about it. And you should leave that meeting understanding either we don't have the funds right now, but here's what we're going to do, or yeah, we actually do. Let's do that, or let's bake it into 2023, right? That should come back. If you're talking to your executive or your management, and they nod their head and walk away, no good. That wasn't what you were coming for. So then reapproach the conversation, but keep away from the buzzwords because they are all over it, right? I mean, insider risk. I mean, now we're all insider risk. It didn't start off that way, but it just there's so many buzzwords right now, and XDR, I don't even know what the hell it means, to be honest with you. I mean, it keeps changing. So, and they're morphing their products into it, right? We did EDR, MDR. By the way, we were always XDR. Oh, okay. Fair enough. Got it. I don't put much weight into the buzzwords. Unless there's swag. Now, swag-wise, no, just
Okay, and we have time for one last question.
I have a question, and this would go out for the sponsors to hear. Thank you to all of our sponsors that are here today. We couldn't be here without you guys, so a round of applause to our sponsors. But a question that I have for this group of CISOs that you might laugh when I first ask you, because I'm sure your inbox is inundated with emails. How does a sponsor get in front of a CISO and in front of you guys? So if each of you could just tell me the best way, because I ask this question at every event, and every CISO has, most of them have the same answer, but it'll be interesting to see what you guys say. And it would be great advice to all the sponsors here.
The first thing I would tell you is wait for 120 days. I can't tell you how many people come up to me within the first 90 days, and it's inundating. It's too much. So wait, at least give me 90 days in this position. And then I would just probably reach out. Don't do the give me the 1, 2, 3 answer. Don't tell me the problem you're trying to solve. Just be authentic and genuine and say you would like to have a conversation and discuss XYZ when I get a second. And typically then I will put you in touch with someone who's responsible for the scheduling piece, and usually within the next couple weeks it's scheduled. But if you come to me telling me you're solving a problem, or for me to answer 1, 2, 3, it gets deleted.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm looking for that agnostic approach, right? I'm looking for outcome-based solutions, regardless of what particular logo is on the box or on the shirt, right? We're looking for the best fit. Price is almost always the last consideration that we use in our decision-making process. And we would want a true partner, somebody that, you know, hey, if they can't do that, they step up to the plate and say, that's not in my wheelhouse. I don't want to try to fake it till I make it. We're not we'll build it if you come. Those are not the type of vendors that I'm looking for. So honesty, I think, is key. And then truly having a partnership with us and understanding that it may require more than one partner, which is, you know, potentially your competitor, but that's the model that we're looking for.
Marketing emails don't work. So the email blast, it's just constant and a steady stream. So those don't help at all. I used to be self-employed, so as an independent business owner, you go out and you meet people, and so it drove me nuts going to a networking event, and there were people in the room, and their mindset was everyone within 3 feet is an opportunity to sell, as opposed to everyone within 3 feet of me is an opportunity to build a new relationship and help someone. And so I always started conversations with, what do you do? What is it that you need to be able to do? And who can I connect you with that can help you do that? Those relationships pay dividends in the long run. And so building relationships, those trusted advisor introductions, so somebody else that I'm doing business with that introduces, or somebody that I know, speaking from a vendor standpoint, somebody that I'm doing business with, asking them for introductions to people who may have a need for something that I need to be able to offer them. That sounded really convoluted, but you get the idea, right? It's about trusted relationships. It's about introductions. It's about helping people. It's not necessarily about sales. And I know that that's a challenge because as sales professionals, you have requirements, sales quotas, all those kinds of things. But it's a challenge for me to be able to do things that way. And then also we have other government procurement requirements that preclude me from actually doing things like that as well. And so those things have to come through our procurement office. It doesn't help that I've gotten a lot of introductions ahead of time. It has to happen in a particular way.
I agree. I think when I see a phone number that I don't recognize, I don't answer it. If I get an email from a vendor and it's completely not related to my job or what I do, I block the email. If it comes in through LinkedIn and I don't know them, I don't have a mutual connection, I don't accept the request, I don't respond to the mail. So that's tough. It's tough to sell when there's so many blocks like that. I think typically when we do need a solution, we reach out and we go through the customary ask for 3 or 4 different vendors to come in and do a pitch. And it's not always price. I think it does come down to, do I feel like that vendor is going to be a partner? Are they going to help us along the way? And are they honest? If the tool doesn't do something, please tell me it doesn't do that, instead of saying, yeah, and then I buy it and I find out it doesn't at all work. It doesn't at all do what was promised. So I think our most successful relationships with vendors have been when we have a customer success manager and that relationship extends beyond just the purchase. For years we have support and somebody to talk to that keeps coming back and saying, how's it going? How can we help you? Is there more you want to do with the tool? Are you offering any kind of training afterwards? Do you have any kind of resources that you offer to the customer after the purchase is done? So I agree, it comes down to building a very strong relationship before the sale and after.
Thank you. So that's about all the time we have today for our panel discussion. Let's get a big round of applause to our panel. Did a great job today.